do we have any questions about like the general framing, any of the texts I've suggested? Oh yeah. Lord of the Flies, I think Lord of the Flies was inspired by Utopia. I think it's certainly in conversation with Utopia, but probably even more so with texts like Robinson Crusoe, and also Gulliver's Travels. Like there are these two like competing sort of forms of the novel in the 18th century that are wrestling over the idea of like, are humans essentially good or essentially bad? Right. So like Robinson Crusoe, he ends up alone on the island and it's like this story of heroic survival, right? Versus like ending up on an island and learning, like in the island of Dr. Moreau, that we're all animals. You know what I mean? And so I totally see Lord of the Flies as using the isolated situation of the island and the fact that they're all children, right, to kind of like think through this. But I actually hadn't thought of that, whether that would work in a class like this. That's a kind of super intriguing idea. Any other questions?
I kind of have an observation,
Yeah.
maybe a question.
Hmm.
Um, so I just introduced a dystopian unit like this week on
Great.
Monday and Tuesday this week. And I had a student, this is the first time I've ever had this experience, who was angry that so many texts could be considered dystopian texts.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
And I didn't really know how to like corral his emotional reaction to that.
Interesting.
Or I mean, I think I'm going to use some of the things that you've talked about with utopian texts to kind of give him a more specific definition. But the kids read an article, it talked about dystopian and utopian fiction.
Yeah.
They crafted a definition. But
Yeah.
I guess I wondered, yeah, like how do you specify or narrow down or like deal with the nuance of
Yeah.
some texts like Lord of the Flies, maybe you're
Totally.
I didn't think of that as a dystopian text, or like Planet of the Apes. You're like, oh, I really think of that as more sci-fi, but I guess yeah, it is dystopian. So like, how do you deal with that subtlety or nuance of definition?
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, I will say I'm on like this mission in life to argue to everyone that the word dystopia is unnecessary and we can just, it's all utopia. They're all bad. It's fine. We don't need this word. But it's like futile and hopeless. And it's like, why am I still trying? It's like the word dystopia is not going anywhere. So I'll just like give that brief aside to really say that like I too have often have students who have like really strong, firm sense of what things are or are not in these categories. And a lot of the writers I teach have super strong opinions. They're like, I'm not writing science fiction. Margaret Atwood is like, this is not a utopia. She said it over and over again. Right. And so what I say, and actually what I think is like, this is the fun of being a literary critic, is like having arguments about our categories and figuring out like, oh, you don't think this is in the category? Okay, so like, how are you defining the category? Like, tell me. And here's how I'm defining the category, right? And then notice those like different concepts, and then that becomes the grounds for a conversation. I mean, there's never going to be a moment where someone's like, congratulations, you've got it right. Like these 700,000 texts are utopias and nothing else. Do you know what I mean? As much as I wish that could happen, like it's always going to be a moving target. But I think for me, by trying to talk concretely about how I'm trying to find a way to define utopia in the classroom and then inviting students to sort of adopt or resist my definition as they see fit. I feel like that's kind of can be the good action of the class, if that makes any sense. Yeah. I think still take, yeah, I think texts like Hunger Games and Maze Runner, I think are totally pinging off the genre. And I think as long as you as the choreographer in the classroom are like noticing connections that you think you can make evident or you think are going to come through student engagement, then that's sort of good enough, right? It's sort of like mapping these connections and using that as the kind of frame through which to have a series of student conversations. The Giver is another great example. And I think all the better if there are things in their own personal archive that they've encountered in the classroom or in their own personal reading, like with the Hunger Games. I think that that's only an advantage. I mean, what I often say is utopias at root are often asking a set of questions, like implied questions to the reader. And it's basically like, what would you give up to never be hungry? Like what would you give up so that there would never be another war? And the Hunger Games is literally like, how many children would you be willing to let die to have a perfect world? Right. And so like if I can like find that shared question, then I think there's like stuff you can do in the classroom. Well, the chat is so interesting. A young adult novel that you would recommend for utopia and dystopia. That's a good question. I mean, maybe Hunger Games. Possibly. I'll think about that. I'll think about that until next week, actually. The young adult genre is very mysterious to me. In like what is or isn't present in it. I talk about Hunger Games a lot. I like it and it comes up a lot. So that's my initial answer, but I think I'll think more on that too. Ooh, the Marrow Thieves. I don't even know what that is. I'm writing that down. Okay. Yeah, Brave New World is like a cool way of, and then I mean you probably can't do this, I recognize, maybe in your classroom spaces, but I always show clips from Westworld. I don't know if you watched Westworld on HBO a few years ago, where the Anthony Hopkins character is named Ford. So there's clearly like a looping back between Brave New World and Shakespeare in kind of like remediating all of these questions. So could Candide be considered utopian? So here's where my specific definition of utopia starts to sort things a little bit differently from others. Whereas I am not calling centering utopia as a philosophical exercise that tries to understand the best state. Right? If I did define utopia that way, I would be talking about Plato's Republic, and maybe Candide. It would be like a whole set of other texts that are sort of imagining ideal or perfect worlds, right? And my preference in organizing my syllabi is to think more about like the framed stories that are playing games between what's true and what's not true. But I think like you could loop in Voltaire, certainly, if you wanted to center the kind of political theory aspect of utopia. Yeah, man, Handmaid's Tale, they love it. And I mean, how fascinating just to age as a teacher of this text. I mean, when I was first teaching it in 2010, people read it very, very differently than they do now. Ella Minnow P. I don't know. Oh my gosh, thank you guys. I don't know these texts.